Hi, welcome to Mother Murderer Podcaster, where we celebrate the best and the most outrageous TV movies of the 80s and 90s. I'm Lewis Jordan, a writer,
I'm Katie Madonnelly, a filmmaker.
and today we're covering the Ryan White story, starring Queen of TV movies, Judith Light, the legendary George C. Scott, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Lukas. Um, it first aired on ABC on January 16th, 1989. Ryan White was the poster child for the AIDS epidemic during the late 80s. And whereas other sort of high profile cases like Rock Hudson, for example, were adult gay men, Ryan White was a Midwestern teenage boy with hemophilia who got the virus through infected blood products. And his whole fight to be allowed to attend school became front page news. And for a little while, for several years, uh, White was the national face of HIV. And Katie has wanted to cover this movie. I remember you talking about this since we started the podcast. Um, and I think, because it's, a well known and important TV movie, but also it's set in Indiana, in Kokomo, Indiana. And, Katie lives in Indiana. I grew up in Indiana with her. So, I think, and I don't remember so much of the Ryan White thing. I was tuned out of that, but you remember Ryan White that was a big deal, especially in Indiana.
It was huge.
Yeah.
Huge. It was huge.
I'll do the summary
Okay.
real fast and then we can just like dive right in so we won't have to pause for anything. Um,
Sounds good. Go
oh,
for it.
okay, so the Ryan White story. The film opens with a montage of life in rural Indiana. Football, square dancing, mom and pop stores set to Small Town by John Mellencamp. We're introduced to Jeannie White, played by Judith Light, a single mother who works in a car factory. And she and her two very normal children, Ryan and Andrea, live in Kokomo, Indiana during the mid 80s. Ryan, played by Lukas Haas, is about 13. He's a little shy and insecure. He has a crush on a girl at school. Andrea is very into this kind of figure skating that's done on roller skates, and I'm not sure what you call it. It's like figure roller skating, and she wins a competition. And Ryan's a hemophiliac, which means that he has trouble forming blood clots, but he's treated with this product made from blood plasma. And one day, Ryan gets sick with a high fever, and Jeannie takes him to the hospital. And the doctors discover that he has a rare type of pneumonia that's only seen in people with compromised immune systems, like people with AIDS. And it turns out that Ryan has AIDS, and he got it from an infected dose of the blood plasma product because they weren't properly screening the blood being used to make it. So, with the help of a kind and pretty nurse played by Sarah Jessica Parker, uh, Ryan recovers and he goes home. But when he tries to go back to his life, his high school principal won't allow him to return to classes out of fear that he might spread HIV to the other children. And even after Jeannie explains that HIV can't be spread by casual contact, the other students' parents demand that Ryan be kept out of school. So Jeannie goes to a lawyer, played by George C. Scott, to sue the Indiana Department of Education to get them to allow Ryan to return to school. And it becomes a huge battle. Pretty soon, the whole town is talking about Ryan White. There's vicious rumors being spread about him. The school's parents go door to door getting people to sign a petition to keep him out of school. Jeannie's harassed at work. Andrea's harassed at school. Um, Then the case begins to attract national attention, and reporters are camping out in front of their house. Um, Ryan is at first sort of overwhelmed by all of this and tells his mother that he wants to just drop the suit, but she talks him out of it. And then Ryan gets very sick. He returns to the hospital where he makes friends with another young AIDS patient played by the actual Ryan White, making a cameo. And this time, Ryan is really determined. And after he recovers, Jeannie is the one who says we should just quit. This is too much. This is too much for me to take. But Ryan is determined. So he now the lawyer is just representing him without his mother's involvement. So Ryan wins the case, and he's allowed to go to school. It's a big triumph. But then when the White family comes home, they find a bullet hole in one of their windows, which is a warning from, the people of Kokomo, basically. So at school, Ryan's ostracized by the other kids. Andrea is so scared by the bullet hole, she wants to quit skating. Finally, Jeannie takes out a loan and she buys the family a new house in Cicero, Indiana, another town. And Ryan sort of warily goes to his first day of school in Cicero, but the students have already heard about Ryan and they're extremely kind and welcoming. And the film ends with Elton John's I'm Still Standing playing over the credits, saying that, as of the airing of this film, Ryan was still alive and doing really well, and he had a job and a girlfriend, and he died about a year after the airing of this film. So, Katie, what are your memories of Ryan White when he first became a media sensation? That was 85 or so, or when all of this really
It
started
was
to
around
hit.
86 ish. I think 85 was when it was starting. During this, it became what would you do if you were Kokomo, Indiana? So I think of when I was in second grade or so, I'd say 87 was when um, it was really huge in Indiana. For instance, our school, I went to a Catholic school, and my principal came over the monitor and she actually said, you cannot get AIDS through sharing a toilet, through sharing a drinking fountain, through sitting next to somebody. And she made it very clear, and it was really intense. We had an assembly, and I think it was because Kokomo had become such a villain to the whole state.
Yeah.
The whole state hated Kokomo, and Kokomo was the worst place in Indiana. Kokomo was a town of bigots. So it gave the opportunity for people who would probably do the same thing to Ryan White in South Bend to say, oh, no, this will look really bad. We can't do that. So we're going to have an assembly, have somebody come and talk about Ryan White and have somebody talk about AIDS. And that was a positive from the Ryan White media. And I think in many ways it had a positive influence on the younger generations.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people my age, we saw Ryan as, oh my gosh, we would never be that awful.
Yeah.
It was huge for me and my cousins, because I remember we would watch the news. We would watch like 2020 a lot, and 60 Minutes. We would watch that, and they would have nightly news on AIDS, and that it was very much a Hollywood, high flying, kind of risque, those kind of people got it disease. And it was huge in that time. But when Ryan got it, it was hold the brakes. This is getting out of bounds of who the disease was meant for. And that
Yes.
completely shifted. I mean, 100% overnight. Like I could see parents completely just uh like a deer in headlights.
And I think I get the sense that early on there was very much in not in New York or LA or places, you know, with big gay populations, but in the rest of America, there was this sort of idea of well, AIDS is sort of, you know, some people said, oh, this is God's punishment. And
Yes.
then, but there, even if you weren't being that harsh, there was generally a sense of like, well, if you're going to do risky things like that, then, you know, you sort of getting what you deserve. And then I guess the whole narrative of God's punishment, then when you see Ryan White, there's no way, you know, this is like a sweet, normal, middle America white kid, you know, who is so likable and well spoken and everything. You know, what could he possibly be punished for this? So that kind of punched a hole in that logic.
Yeah, but it was also, you know, if we do think about how he was being punished, this was never addressed in the TV movie, but he was being punished by the red tape and the Reagan politics because they were not testing the blood. Ryan White is
Yeah,
the reason they tested donated blood after that
yeah,
because they were it wasn't, and the band played on, and that made for TV movie that was an HBO movie on AIDS, and it was based on the book, and it
yeah,
shows the CD trying to figure out the behavior of AIDS. If it was a virus, how was it transmitted? Could they quarantine it? And they were trying to quarantine it, um, and they went to blood suppliers, and the basically it was, we're not, they had a test that was pretty much, I think, 80% right in detecting the HIV virus, and the blood supplies, our government was basically, no, we're not going to test the blood supply. And that was before Ryan got, got the blood, and Ryan White wasn't the only person in Indiana, obviously, to get AIDS or HIV from a blood transfusion. My mom's had a classmate who, his brother, he got it, and when he passed away, they said he had cancer, because in the 80s,
mm-hmm.
when you 80s and 90s, a lot of times, especially during the early 80s, you had to lie and say people had cancer for them to um take your body, or just you would save face in the news to have people come to your funeral. You would not say they died of HIV or AIDS. And even now, sometimes people will hide their illness,
Yeah,
and that's fine. It's their choice. But oftentimes it was said because the stigma of it, it was the plague. That's why they have the documentary called How to Fight a Plague, because it
yeah,
was seen as a plague. It was a plague, but it was also a plague of neglect on the bureaucrats created, helped facilitate the plague, because it could have been stopped in many ways,
yes.
especially with the blood transfusion, because Ryan White wasn't the first person to get it through a blood transfusion. There were
No, he was
other
just the most
notable,
public.
very well off people.
Oh, he was just the most public person to get it from a blood transfusion.
He 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 was, and I remember, so how I first heard about it was on a People magazine, because People magazine was very vocal about AIDS and HIV at the time. And that is, for me, how I experienced the changing culture of AIDS, HIV. People magazine in the 80s was very different than it is now. Um,
Mm,
and they kind of focused on human interest stories, and very um and it was actually kind of intriguing, and it wasn't just celebrities and had this reality show veneer. But in the 80s, it tended to be more focused on like human interest stories and
Yeah,
cultural
and I
milestones.
read and I read that that Ryan White was on the cover of People 4 times.
Yes, 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 he was. He was a huge celebrity. He was gigantic. Like one of the things that was really weird, so as a little kid watching him, so I kind of, I think I had a relationship with Ryan White during most of my, I'd say, childhood from like 6 to when he died. I think he died when I was 10 or 11.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember for me and my cousins, we would stay up to date with the Ryan White story. Like, we drove through Kokomo to go to Florida when it was just happening. And I remember my aunts and my mom being like, "Boo, Kokomo! Kokomo's the worst city." And we were like, "Yeah, we'd be friends with you, Ryan. We would never be mean to you. Screw them." Like we were like booing it. And even still, when I drive to Bloomington or south, and I have to go through Kokomo, I still get weird. I still remember. I still think about it. It's such a it didn't it seems like yes it happened to Ryan, but it ricocheted throughout the entire state, and especially for younger kids or people that were like very sympathetic, it was just a huge cultural phenomenon that I still think about to this day.
Since you were talking about Kokomo and associations with them, I thought it's very good journalism from you. You got in contact with someone from Kokomo, and could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So I wanted to speak with somebody like a kind of an eyewitness or somebody who would have information on the Kokomo perspective of Ryan White's legacy. Mostly because, as Lewis had pointed out, he's like very rarely in a TV movie is a place the villain. So it's interesting because this is a valid point. Lewis brought this up. He said, the villain in the story is not AIDS. The villain in the story is Kokomo. And that's true.
Hmm.
AIDS is the inciting incident to the town, the villain showing up, showing itself.
Yeah,
It takes the band-aid off and shows like the wound underneath, this ugliness underneath this town, the ignorance.
yeah.
um so yes, I reached out to the Kokomo Historical Society. Now real quick, Kokomo is not a small town as it was
No.
shown. Kokomo is a industrial mid-sized city in Indiana, so that is important to address because the gentleman I spoke with, he was the oral historian for the Ryan White project. He
Mm.
interviewed and put together the archive for the Ryan White um, archive at the Historical Society. But one of the things he said was that Kokomo did not they were offended by the TV movie and how they were portrayed as, square dancing in the opening really offended them.
Hmm.
That really made them mad. That they're like, square dancing, we don't square dance. They got very mad about that. And I can see why.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
little simplification of, because I've been to Kokomo and I can tell you there is no square dancing going on. Um, but one of the things from his friends, he did have friends, and in the movie they kind of felt like it showed that he only, he was pretty much ostracized, and he did have friends, he did have classmates who started a petition for him to stay in school. And they left out a lot of the people who did rally for him, that there were people who came out, and there were way worse things that did happen that they did not show as well.
It's interesting to see how that affected the town of Kokomo, because Ryan White's story, it wasn't just uh, a thing that happened that caught the national attention for a little bit. It was really this narrative, and Ryan White became a symbol. And just like Ryan White became a symbol, Kokomo
Yes.
became a symbol. Everything in the Ryan White story was based in fact, but it was also this much bigger symbolism of what if this were your child? What if this were your town?
Yeah. My mom had a beauty shop at the time, and there was a lady doing nails, and the lady Sharon, I remember she said that the rumor about him spitting on people was huge because that was all over. That was all over up in South Bend, and there were people and ignorant people up in South Bend that were saying, "Well, he spit on kids, so they shouldn't let him in school." And
Mm-hmm.
um Sharon was like, "I would never, I'd kill him." She said that, like, she said that to, they were talking, she's doing someone's nails, and my mom and her got into an argument. And I remember that because it was like, you don't know that you're being real ignorant. She's like, "I wouldn't let my kid go to school with him, blah, blah, blah." So he really revealed the true character of people,
Yeah.
when you brought his name up. He brought up their true character in many ways. And going back to the Kokomo archive, um, Kokomo actually Ryan White inducted him in 2013. They inducted Ryan White into their Kokomo Hall of Legends. And Jeannie, his mother, came up for the ceremony, and she received a standing ovation, like 3 or 4 standing ovations over and over. So that to me is huge. That to me means a lot. I'm getting goosebumps actually right now as I say it, because it means a lot to me that Kokomo, the community came out to, they in many ways, the majority, the kids now. So to me, that says the kids that grew up with Ryan White were speaking up for him, and they didn't like the way he was treated. So the fact that the community has reflected on Ryan and has decided to bring him, has said, no, what happened here was important. And we respect him. And we also discussed how in the media, one of the things they didn't like, that lives on, is that, Ryan was a boy in Kokomo in Indiana, but there were kids that were treated, that had AIDS, HIV in New York City, and in Florida. There was this young boy who had AIDS in Florida, and they burnt down his house, and things like that were happening at this time. It wasn't like Ryan White was the only child who developed this disease. But this is what I love, the archivist said. He goes, but the difference is Ryan stood his ground. Ryan stood his ground and demanded to go to school. He wanted to go to school. Like, he was like, no, you're not going to kick me out. I'm going. So he pushed back and stood his ground. And that is why we heard of Ryan White. Not because Ryan White developed AIDS and HIV. It was because the town was the villain. The school board, the superintendent was the villain of the story, as we said. And he said, no, I'm going to take this. We're going to do something about this. He wanted to go to school.
I think it's interesting, that yes, the narrative of the court case was what set Ryan apart, but also just Ryan being this kind of, how there's an everyman. He was like an every boy. He could be anybody's son, and even the name, there's Ryan White. It's sort of like, purity and innocence is right there, and um, and the word innocent really crops up a lot in coverage about him, calling him an innocent victim. And, yep. Elton John got involved very early on with, becoming friends with the White family and being supportive of them. And many years later, he did an interview with Anderson Cooper, and he didn't say it directly, but he said it sort of indirectly that, on one hand, he was very moved personally by Ryan's plight and by Ryan's struggle and strength, but also he saw how Ryan could be a symbol to change public perception about AIDS and change the government's approach. And
Yeah.
so he was like, okay, this is important. And I thought it was, interesting that, the first TV movie, which we may cover at some point, in Early Frost, the first TV movie about AIDS, was about a gay man dying of AIDS, um, played by Aidan Quinn.
Aidan Quinn. He's the
Aidan
Irish
Quinn.
actor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and his mother's played by Gina Rowlands, um, and that had good ratings, but it wasn't the film to change hearts and minds. And it was there was still this kind of idea that if you got HIV through gay sex, then you you deserved it. You weren't innocent. But if you're a child who got it because of a contaminated blood transfusion, then you're sympathetic because sex wasn't involved. And
Yeah.
I think, I guess there's the idea that oh, if you are going to have sex, then and not use a condom, then you should know what you're getting in for. But
Well, to be
there's
fair, to be fair, the word condom wasn't even said by the Surgeon General until 1986. Okay,
yeah,
and the Surgeon General went against Reagan's wishes to say that. So no one even knew that you could wear a condom. Okay,
yeah,
that
and
wasn't even
that was
when
how it
this
was
was in
spread.
1985. They had no idea because the Reagan administration would not release any information that the CDC was begging them to release about this disease, how you could get it. It was body fluids, it was blood. And the CDC was, that's how they probed together. That's how they put it together, that it was they were interviewing certain people, and certain people were getting it through blood transfusions. Some people were getting it through sex. They were discovering a lot of gay men had it too, along with random people who never had sex, like people who had no idea what anal sex was. And they were like, well, what are you? And that's what's so fascinating about the book and the band Played On, where they're trying to develop information about this disease. Well, the CDC finally had this information about 84, and they went to the Reagan administration and they were like, no, this disease, we don't want to get involved. What they did with Rock Hudson was ridiculous. I mean, Ronald Reagan was friends with Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was obviously, before Ryan White, Rock Hudson was the face of AIDS. And what the
Yes.
public did to him and how he passed away was unforgivable. It was humiliating, and no one should ever have to die that way. What happened with Rock Hudson was, for people who don't know, he was a very beautiful actor, and he acted, and he was a peer of Ronald Reagan when Ronald Reagan was an actor in Hollywood before he was president. Ronald Reagan knew everybody in Hollywood. He was the president of SAG. He was in a union himself. And when Rock Hudson developed AIDS, he could go to France. He could go to France to get treatment, and he gave a telegram he sent a telegram to Ronald Reagan begging him to help him get into France, that they needed his authority to get him in, and Reagan denied it. He just couldn't get involved. And photographers took photos of Rock Hudson's emaciated appearance and published those, showing Rock Hudson at the French airport. It's just, how could you do that? Like, it just
And
speaks to the character of Ronald Reagan.
yeah, and then at one point, Ryan White was invited to meet the Reagans at their house. Barbara Bush, um, was present at his funeral. So, you know, it was like he things really changed with Ryan.
In
Uh,
many ways, the culture of AIDS was very much not seen as a disease. It was seen as righteous punishment from God. And they
yes.
weren't saying this. And then to say, oh, you can get it through sex, you can get it through sharing needles, you can get it from blood transfusion, was to say it was actually a virus that um, did not care. You know, it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
preventable, but there were certain things you had to do and that the government had to do to make sure people didn't get it, such as give them information, check the blood supply, things like that. And that would just mess the narrative up of the Reagan administration's voter base. It would mess up the story that the 700 Club and the evangelicals had about this disease.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Sorry.
And
I didn't mean to get
I
into
thought,
this.
no, yeah, of course. And I thought that it was interesting that to appeal to those kind of 700 Club people, the media narrative for Ryan White feels almost a little like a Christian martyr, you know, where
Yes.
he really strongly believes in something and he believes in what's right, and he's not going to let people shake him, and he's so good, and there are people who are doing terrible things and he refuses to condemn them, and there's something very sort of Christian and
Yeah.
Christ-like about that presentation of him, um,
But
which
that works.
yeah, yeah, and
That
I think that
works.
in the movie sometimes that kind of presentation of him as, you know, the bravest little boy in the world kind of bumps up against the the more uh, sort of realistic parts of the story and the more sort of human aspects, that and so I thought that would be an interesting way to kind of look at the Ryan White story, you know, the movie. Because as I was watching it, I felt like it was a mix of moments that felt real and genuine, and then total other moments that felt like melodrama.
Yeah.
And I wanted to sort of look at it as, in what ways does this TV movie feel like a piece of agitprop, and in what ways does it feel like an authentic human story? Um, and I think that I really enjoyed the. There were certain parts of it that felt to me very authentic, especially the ways that the family interacted with each other, the way that the kids were like, "Stay away from my stuff." You know, I didn't take your stuff. Yes, you did, and
Yeah.
that felt so real. Um, and you know, there were and the ways that Ryan could sometimes get kind of bratty, or, you know, like throw a tantrum or something like that. That felt so real. But then they would have moments where, you know, his mother's saying, "I gave you hemophilia," and Ryan says, "You gave me life." And I thought, oh, here's the TV movie. Here's
Yeah.
the
I did. I did. When he said that, I was like, I heard Lewis go.
yeah, you
I
heard
heard
my
it. I could
eyes
hear.
roll.
I could hear it because I was like, I was 13 and I would never say that to my mom. I was like, Mom, I'm sad. Bela Lugosi's dead. I'm goth. I'm an
Yeah.
atheist. Like, when you're 13, that's like, your normal attitude is, you're just starting to get really angry about everything. Um, what's interesting to me is I saw this as a little kid and it was an event. It was an event.
Yes.
My cousins and me, Stephanie Stacy Siobhan, We all sat in front of the TV and we watched it. It was huge. And I remember we were dancing around at the end till, I'm still standing. We were like, woo, we were like, yeah, Ryan. And we were like, Indiana, we are on the TV. It was a big deal
Yeah.
to have Indiana there. And seeing it now from a filmmaker point of view and a grown up, it is still weird to decipher what I actually think of it, because I thought the tracking, from a filmmaker point of view, I thought the tracking shot in the factory, I was analyzing how to shoot that, and all I was thinking was, oh God, this, the sound, you have to do radio mics and you have to track it and you have to rack focus. So, and how did they get all the sound and all the extras in the background? I was thinking about all the production side of things, and I was like, that was really impressed by that tracking shot. But the other hand, as a little kid, I still have those moments that I would totally be gullible for. There are a lot, there are certain scenes where I was like, yeah, as a kid, I would eat this up with a spoon. Like, Mom, you gave me life. I could see my mom being like, oh, look at him saying that to his mother. You would, say that to me.
Yeah. There was
like, things like that.
another thing was the Ryan, the character played by the real Ryan White, this other kid with AIDS that he's sharing a hospital room with, and the other kid is like, oh, I'm just, I'm so tired. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to do anything. I just have this feeding tube. It hurts to eat. And Ryan's like, come on, let's go get comics. Let's go do this thing. Like, don't give up. And it's very much showing Ryan as this, active, positive person. And then this other guy who's the real Ryan White being sort of like an Eeyore, like, oh, I don't know, I'm tired, I'm sad, I'm gonna die.
I love Eeyore. I have to say, when he came on screen and he's like, I'm tired, I was like, I am too. I'm laying down with my Snuggie and I'm like, same, here. I was like, don't be sad. I'm like, get away from him, telling him what to do, making him walk around.
Yeah.
I love that the character Ryan White plays is like, get a feeding tube. You don't have to eat.
Yeah, I know. That made me think of that thing from the Simpsons where he was like, here I am eating my own food like a schmuck when I could be getting a feeding tube. But then
that was funny.
But then on the other hand, there are these certain scenes like when Ryan like when Jeannie is first reacting to Ryan having AIDS, and she's in the car and she says to her daughter, well, if Ryan is going to die, then we're all going to die, and we're just going to go into the garage and I'll turn on the car and close the door and we'll all go to sleep. And I was like, holy shit, they couldn't have made that up. That had to have happened. She had to have told them that she said that, because damn. So sometimes it felt so so real, and it just had this this really interesting mixture of a real genuine human story, and then the sort of pieces of melodrama that needed to be present to construct a piece of basically a piece of propaganda, which, is not, it was good propaganda. It was propaganda telling people you can't get AIDS from, casual contact. You shouldn't be, it was, but it was sort of, the movie had certain things that it wanted to communicate. And so it had to follow a certain plot structure to be able to communicate those things. And I think it is, thinking about it in that way, it's impressive that they got so many moments in it that do feel real and lived in.
Yeah, and there was a lot on their plate. So we can look back at it now and be like, "Oh, well," and pick it apart, but you have to understand at that time with TV movies, they were events that would only air that night and everybody watched it. There was a lot of press that would go into this and a lot of people would watch it and they had a cultural impact. The next day people would talk about it and um it it ricocheted. So they did have to position themselves to educate and to change minds. So they
Yes.
did have to do a lot of the, have a lot of the devices in there that maybe, more art house filmmakers or sophisticated filmmakers or media watchers of today we take for granted. They really had to, because these TV movies were how people learned about got educated about kidnapping, got educated about
Hmm.
AIDS, got educated about many things. It had a cultural impact. It had a domestic in the house impact on how people communicated with their kids. So I think that sometimes it can be cringy, but at the same time, uh, it's good that it's in there, because I've read the comments. I went through reading the comments. I wanted to do that on YouTube. That's one thing I love about YouTube, is that there's comments and not reviews, but comments, so people can actually say, this movie means this to me. And so many people were saying, I remember when this happened. I remember this. I remember that. This makes me cry. Good for you, Ryan. Your legacy is so important. So even though in many ways uh, it can be mm, cringy and melodramatic in some parts, it holds up for a lot of people, especially me. In my memory, I remember watching it and I just fell in love with Judith Light. I thought she was amazing. I thought she did so good, and
Yeah,
I loved
let's
his
talk about
sister. Oh
Judith
my
Light.
god, we were like, she's so, yes, I love Judith. I thought she was so good at his mom. I just thought she was so strong, and God, she did such a good job of. I mean, I just look back now being a grown up and working. I'm like, how did she go to work every day, be bullied by coworkers, and go home and take care of her sick child all by herself? Like, oh my god, like I'm just sitting there like I and she's staying up all night with Ryan who's sick, and then she has to go work her shift the next day at the Chrysler plant, because
Yeah.
it's a auto Kokomo is an automotive city, by the way.
Oh.
It makes car parts. Factory work is not for the weak. It is brutal, it is very intense, and it's long. It's like 12 hours, very noisy, very
Yeah.
loud, and very physical too. So
Yeah.
the fact that she was doing all these things and then had the mental stress of the national news, the court case. Woo! So Jeannie, his mother, is a hero, and Judith Light, what a great. She just had so much. She had such a regal presence to her when she played Jeannie. Like, I just felt she was so commanding, and it's interesting because I was thinking, like, I was trying to see where her Angela Bauer disappeared. In many ways, her Angela Bauer I did not see there. She really was able to lose that kind of Connecticut Angela Bauerness that you see in Who's the Boss. I didn't really see it. I thought she did a good job of kind of coming into a Kokomo mother, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm biased because I just love
No,
Judith Light. So
I think so too. And it's interesting that you mention Angela Bauer. So I saw an interview with Judith Light about this film, and she said that she was doing work raising AIDS awareness and doing fundraising and working with AIDS patients very early on, before it was commonplace in Hollywood, when it was really just, Elizabeth Taylor and a couple of other people. And so she really wanted to be involved in this project. And she really went after the
oh,
part.
good.
And the network initially did not want to cast her because she was Angela Bauer from Who's the Boss. And she campaigned really hard for the part and kept after them and finally got it. And this was, I think, her opportunity, because I think this was the first big TV movie that she did after Who's the Boss. And so this was kind of her chance to prove that she could do something other than Angela Bauer.
She
But
did it.
also, but also it was it it was something that she personally felt very passionate about, and she got close to Ryan because he was on set during filming, and
Mm.
she you know, Elton John was during the last week of Ryan's life. Elton John was there in the hospital with him, and Judith went and visited him then too. Um,
Oh.
so you know, she really took this to heart. Um, was there anybody else in the cast who really stood out to you? I mean, it was
Okay,
interesting to have. Mhm.
I'll never forget. I loved Sarah Jessica Parker as the nurse. I did. I
Yeah,
still remember those scenes a lot because I remember thinking one of the scenes that, oh my gosh, one of the most heartbreaking scenes. Like it's just one of those scenes that makes you realize he is like just he is like a boy who likes girls, and he's so self-conscious about being sick, and it's just like when he's being told he has AIDS, and he goes, does I think does Sarah know? He asks his mom, and she goes, the nurse, and it cuts to Sarah Jessica Parker like out in the hallway, or like he asks if the nurse
yeah,
knows,
yeah.
and she
Because
and it cuts to her, and she's like, oh, because
yeah,
he has a crush on her, and
yes,
it's just,
yeah. And she's presented as
oh
this like fun, pretty, but also really caring and really invested in him kind of person where like of course he would get a crush on her. You know.
yeah.
And yeah, she's so charming in it.
I really liked their I liked how they had a chemistry. Like I liked how the director worked with them, the actors, so that
Yeah,
it felt
Lucas
very
Haas and
playful. Yeah, I thought I loved that with the jello, and they show, because that one scene where it's like they don't always portray Ryan like this angelical, like just like he's so flawless. Like there's that scene where she's trying to get him to eat the jello and he won't, and so he tricks her and he like throws it at her instead, and she's like, that Ryan, that's not okay, and it is
yeah,
it is kind of a, but it is something a 13 or 12-year-old boy would do to a girl, is throw jello at her.
yeah,
And that, you know, I thought, I was like, oh, that's something that always stuck with me. I was like, why did he throw jello at her? Isn't he so, and even when I was little, I was thinking, isn't he supposed to be perfect? Isn't he supposed to be like this angel who does everything right? Even when I was little, I thought that. So
yeah.
that jello scene makes him kind of look like a flawed human.
Yeah, there those were the things that really stuck with me when he calls in to that radio show that's saying terrible stuff about his mother and being, and you know, yells at them and is like, "You stop talking about my mom. My mom is
Yeah.
great. She loves me." And it is really it feels like a that feels like a real kid, and that stuff really hits you. Um
Yeah.
and
I loved his
so
sister. She does not, that sister. Oh my God. I loved his sister. I really did. I love that she roller skated. And that's something that has stuck with me for years, as I was like, when did we have roller skating, like figure roller skating
yeah,
here? Because
right?
I would have done that. I would have done that in
Yeah.
a minute. I was always roller skating. And I still like, is she still roller skating? I loved his sister. I thought she did a good job. And I liked that it showed it's everything's Ryan White, right? And I'm glad that they showed that in the movie, because to me it reminded me of so often when you have a disabled sibling, the whole family surrounds that disease or that kid, and the 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 other people in the family, their needs and their dreams get neglected. It becomes all about propping up the sick child, and I see that a lot. And I'm glad that they had those moments, because I'm pretty sure, it's just like any other sibling. It's like already, it's like, why did they get everything? And then it's like there had to be some jealousy. I thought the sister was good. I liked her.
Yeah, yeah, all of that, the interactions between them, I thought were really good. Um, so I wanted to talk about a few of the things that I found out about the sort of the differences between the real life story and the movie.
Okay.
Um, it's interesting that it seems like the movie held back in some ways. That One thing that they didn't have in the movie, they may have mentioned it, but they didn't really feature, was that the court in Kokomo, I guess it was the school board or whatever, but they tried to make Ryan and Andrea wards of the court by attempting to declare Jeannie an unfit mother. And that was really bad. And then
Oh, that's horrible.
people on the local radio station said that Jeannie was a front for the gay community, and that if Ryan was allowed in school, that every gay person in the country was going to come to Kokomo. And then they started speculating that Ryan was having sex with men, and that's how he got it. Um, the bullet hole was real. The slashed tires, that was real. Um, and then there was a anecdote she told about when he was finally able to go to school in Kokomo. He was getting bullied, and one day he went in, and this is something that I guess they could have put in, but they didn't. He came to school to see that someone wrote the F word on his locker, and then they'd broken into his locker, and they wrote that on all of his books and folders. And so he called his mom to say, what, I can't go to class with this stuff written on my books. And so Jeannie tried to get the principal on the phone, but he wasn't there. There's just a secretary. And then Jeannie said, "Look, I've never called a press conference before in my life, but if you don't get Ryan a new locker in 10 minutes, I'm going to call a press conference and tell a bunch of reporters about how Ryan is getting harassed at his new school." And then 10 minutes later, he got a new locker and new folders.
Oh, wow. Go Genie.
Yeah, yeah, she was great. And also there's sort of conflicting information on getting to Cicero. In the movie, she takes out a loan. In real life, I saw a news story that said that she got a loan from Elton John, who was already a friend of the family's at that point. But in her interview, she said that at that time, three different production companies were bidding for the rights to do the TV movie. And when she finally went with one of the companies, she got a check for $25,000, and that was the money, she said, that she used to move the family to Cicero. So it
Okay,
was,
good.
the TV movie was actually part of the story that went into the TV movie. Um,
Meta. Well, they could see
yeah,
Meta doesn't exist back then, and the whole thing is that wouldn't kind of fit into like that TV movie narrative of the 80s
no,
where it was like, I there's no production company. There's no the press did not, this kind of bootstrapping thing that kind of
yeah,
happens in a
yeah.
TV movie where
That
there's either
you're
like
just
a magical entity that gives you money or there's some sort of bootstrapping. You put everything together. I yeah.
Yeah. That was another thing that was not in the movie. In the movie, it was presented as though um, it was just this sort of surprise, like surprise, we got a place in Cicero. But apparently, in real life, Ryan was very sick. He thought he was going to die. His mother thought that he was going to die, and he said that he didn't want to die in Kokomo. And so they were looking at different places, and apparently Ryan really liked the cemetery in Cicero. And so Jeannie said, "All right, we'll go there. That's where you can be buried." But then once he got there, he started to get better. And I guess apparently the head of what was it, the student body president lived 3 doors down from where the whites were moving in. And so she knew, she was like, went to school and was like, Ryan White is moving to Cicero. Um, and so then the school started this whole thing, and I guess they held, uh, you know, uh, oh, I can't think of
An
the word,
assembly.
but yeah,
Probably an
assembly,
assembly.
and yes, and educated the kids about HIV, and then they had them go home and talk to their parents, and they were like, this isn't, the school was very much like, okay, this isn't going to happen here.
Yeah. Good.
And Jeannie said that the first day that the whites moved in, 5 kids stopped by to introduce themselves to Ryan, and 3 moms stopped by to introduce themselves to Jeannie. So it was very much like everybody was like, we want you to feel welcome. They were very
Oh,
aware.
see?
Yeah, I'm sure that the story is more complex than what it was presented as,
Yeah.
but I fully believe that the stuff that happened in the movie did happen in some way. And apparently, even worse stuff happened that they left out. Um,
Yeah.
and speaking about policy, um, when Ryan was in the hospital dying, Senator Ted Kennedy called, and he said that he was introducing a new AIDS Care Act,
Yes.
and asked Jeannie, could they call it the Ryan White Care Act?
Yes.
And then I guess 2 weeks after Ryan died, Jeannie got a call from him again to come in and testify in front of the Senate. And to tell them, and she was like, I don't know anything about politics. I don't know anything about policy. I'm going to say the wrong stuff. I don't want to do it. I'm an emotional mess. And a couple of senators, came in and were like, we really want you to come in and just as a mom, everybody has a mom. So you go in there and be a mom, telling them about what it's like to have a child who was living with AIDS and who died of AIDS, and put a human face on all of this. And so she did it, and then the act passed, and that was actually a hugely important act in age legislation. So that's sort of the legacy.
It is really huge. In fact, when I was doing a lot of interviews for, so side note, everyone, I did a oral history on the gay community and the HIV history in South Bend, Indiana. And a lot of the people I interviewed would say, a lot of the people who got HIV in the, I would say, late 90s that I interviewed would tell me that, they got their funds through the Ryan White funds. The Ryan White Care Act was how they were able to access their medication. So a lot of the medication you see now where people are able to live and take medication and live longer with the HIV.
Mm-hmm.
It's paid for with the Ryan White funds.
Yeah,
So
and
I think
and
that's a great thing.
yeah, and those cocktails came about, maybe a year or so after he died, and so
Yeah.
that was, just the right timing.
And
Also,
that
I
and that
mhm.
was Oh, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to give a shout out to the
Yes.
Buyers Club. The Buyers Clubs, quick note for people who don't know what a buyer club was, the CDC or the FDA was not approving a lot of AIDS drugs in America at the time. Other drugs were being developed in Tokyo, in Mexico, in France, in various countries. So what would happen was different people, they had buyers clubs, so they would pool money and they would go to these different they would go to Tokyo and purchase medication there, they would go to France and purchase medication there, and they would bring it to a buyers club stationed in New York City or Dallas Buyers Club, which the Matthew McConaughey movie
Mhm.
showcases so much. And then they would distribute it to people who had AIDS or AIDS HIV in the community. Of course, you had to belong to the Buyers Club, you had to know about the Buyers Club.
Yeah.
um, but that was how the cocktail came about, because without those buyer clubs, it wasn't like it wasn't like pharmaceutical companies were in a hurry to figure this out. No, it was the gay community was ACT UP. It was members that were trying to heal their own loved ones, so it was people who were who wanted to live, and they were doing anything they could not to be killed by AZT. So I just think that's really important to highlight. And if you want more
Yeah.
information about that, the documentary How to Survive a Plague can give you that information.
Yes, yes, that's an excellent documentary. Um, and one last thing I just sort of wanted to address that as sort of humble and every man as Ryan White is, he was friends with all of these celebrities, and
Yes.
there is Elton John, who I mentioned and a number of times, and he was very close with them. He played a song at Ryan's funeral. Then there was this whole thing with Michael Jackson, and Ryan White went to like the Neverland Ranch several times, and I guess Michael Jackson gave him a red Mustang as a gift, and he wrote a song called "Gone Too Soon" about Ryan, and it was released as a single with a music video that had footage of Ryan. And at this time, I mean, Michael Jackson, it was like Michael Jackson and Madonna were the biggest, stars in the world. So that was pretty
Huge.
major.
Because it was right after the Bad album came out. It was like I'm Bad. The Bad album came out
Yeah.
when Michael was doing this, and then so it was before anyone knew, and or about
Yeah, it
any
was
of those
before anybody
applications that
knew
came
about.
out,
Yeah.
and we were so like Michael Jackson is well we as people who lived in Indiana, we thought Michael Jackson was hanging out with Ryan White because Ryan White was from Indiana and Michael Jackson's from Indiana. So we're like, he's like, oh yeah, he
Oh,
sees himself in this little boy, you
yeah.
know. Um, so we took it to that. We
Yeah.
didn't. It has a different meaning now.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, and it seems like Ryan really he hosted a lot of benefits, and I guess he co-hosted the first AmFAR AIDS benefit in New York with Elizabeth Taylor. And so that's it's kind of amazing how he really did step up to the spotlight and took all of this stuff on and really seemed to have a sense of what he was doing and how important it was and what he was symbolizing. It seemed like he was very aware of all of this and but was able to step up and it wasn't like in our other episode with Norma McCorvey and abortion where it was like, oh God, don't let her get on mic. Jesus, she's gonna say something and piss everybody off. um like he really was so he really stepped up and was an amazing spokesperson. uh as much as I'm kind of like aware of the the narrative around him and the whole innocent victim thing, and I feel like I see what that was. I think that I also have huge respect for Ryan White and for his mother just as people, and that they were in this horrible circumstance but really stepped up and changed things that they were able to change.
Yeah,
It's not his
good
fault
job.
that yeah exactly. um and so to close things out, um the Mary Catherine Gallagher monologue.
I'm getting ready.
Inspired by the SNL character played by Molly Shannon, who is a Catholic schoolgirl who is very overdramatic and obsessed with TV movies and always expressing her feelings in the form of a TV movie monologue. Now, this one, um, uh, now would you like to be Judith Light in this?
I want to be George C. Scott.
Okay, you want to be George C. Scott, and I'll be Judith Light.
I
This is
I
how we'd
honestly
usually.
loved him in that.
Yes, yeah, we didn't really talk about him, because it was a very George C. Scott performance with lots of
Yeah.
gravitas and everything. But he was great, and he brought a very sort of human, relatable side to it.
He definitely was the father that Ryan needed.
Yes, the
and
father that
he felt, yeah, because that's one thing I liked about Andrea. She kept it real. His sister's like, dad's not coming. He doesn't care. Like talking about how Andrea was just like, she must be a Sagittarius.
All
Okay.
right. So
I'm going to try to be George C. Scott.
okay. All right. So the setting is that Ryan they've just come back from court, and they heard that they won their case, but now the Board of Education is appealing, and Jeannie is very upset, and they're all in George C. Scott's office, her and Ryan and George C. Scott, and so that's the setup for this scene. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Here, just a second. I need to. Lola.
Lola.
Okay. I thought we won.
I told you they would appeal.
So we won, but we lost. As soon as we won, we lost.
Now we're going to deal with the big issue. Their appeal will be about Ryan having AIDS.
Well, why don't they believe what the doctors say?
Jeannie, relax.
I can't. I'm sorry. I just can't take it anymore. You don't know what it's like living every day, all day, every day. People just whispering and staring and hating me.
I know how it is.
You don't. You can't. You can't. You can't. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Mr. Vaughn, I'm real sorry. You know, maybe it would just be better if we kept Ryan at home and just forget fighting it, because we just can't win.
We can win.
Even if he does win by some miracle, what's it going to be like for him if he has to go back to school?
When he gets back.
People are so crazy. Anything could happen. Ryan, let's just quit. Okay? And scene.
Mary Catherine. Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. You shall
Yeah.
be in your TV movie soon.
Yeah, when she was sobbing, going, "You can't, you can't."
Yeah,
then I was like, okay, this is the monologue.
This is the one. This is the one. Yes.
So anyway, why don't you tell our listeners about where they can find this podcast?
You can find this podcast on all streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, and you can even find us on YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel with this streaming live, as well as TV movies such as Roe versus Wade, the 1989 Rare film, and including other makeup tutorials that are really corny. You would never want to wear the makeup that I do, but it's fun. It's fun. It's silly.
You do makeup tutorials for like characters from TV movies and stuff like that. And then also there's lots of old TV stuff that you've uploaded with, original commercials and stuff like that. That's just very cool.
Yeah.
And
fun.
then we're also on social media, on Instagram at Mother Murderer Podcaster, on TikTok, on Facebook. So check those out. And we will see you all next time.
Next time. Bye.
Bye.
Oh.